Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the 2015 Peter J. Hoagland Lecture Series. My name is Brian Hastings. I'm the President and CEO of the University of Nebraska Foundation. It's my honor to be here with all of you and to join you in welcoming Mayor Bill de Blasio from New York City to join us to deliver this lecture series here. So, Bill, thank you for making the trip and for joining us at UNO, and welcome to Nebraska. This lectureship was established in 2008 thanks to the generosity and foresight of one of our distinguished alumni and his wife. Jim Crounse was the friend and former chief of staff of Congressman Hoagland, and so I'd like to ask Jim and Patsy to stand and be recognized by all of us here tonight. Jim and Patsy, thank you for your generosity, but also thank you for allowing young people to be inspired to a life of public service. Great opportunity. Jim established this lectureship in honor of Congressman Hoagland, a native Nebraskan who served in the U.S. House of Representatives from 1989 to 1995. A remarkable public servant, Congressman Hoagland dedicated himself to serving the people of Omaha and the people of this state. We're honored to have members of Congressman Hoagland's family with us here tonight, and I'd also like to ask them to stand and be recognized as I introduce them. First, his wife, Barbara. Three of their children, Liz, Chris, and David, who are with us tonight. And also Peter's brother, Lawrence. And finally, we do have some other special guests with us, and I'd like to recognize them as well. Our fellow mayors who are with us tonight, from Lincoln, Chris Beitler, and from Bellevue, Rita Sanders. Our deans of arts and sciences from the University of Nebraska, Omaha, David Booker. And from the University of Nebraska, Lincoln, Joe Francisco. And I know from mingling in the reception this evening that there's a number of other city, county, and state public officials who are with us tonight. Could I ask you to all stand as a group and allow us to welcome you and thank you for your service as well. Thank you again, everybody, and now I'll turn it over to David Booker. Thanks.
Thank you, Brian. Good evening, everyone. I'm Dave Booker, and as Brian said, I have the honor of serving as the Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences here at UNO. And on behalf of the college and UNO, I want to welcome all of you to this wonderful Peter J. Hoagland Integrity and Public Service Lecture. One of my roles here is to introduce Jim Crounse, who will introduce tonight's speaker. But before I introduce Jim Crounse, I want to offer special thanks to you, Brian, and your team here at the University of Nebraska Foundation. I know, Brian, that you made extraordinary efforts to be here today. I think you drove like 8 hours today or something like that to be here tonight, and I think that's commendable. And I hope that you will extend our thanks to everyone at the foundation, especially Annie Boger, Jennifer Arnold, Joy Farringer, and Mary Bernier. Job well done. I also want to give thanks to the College of Business here at UNO for hosting this event. Dean Lewis Pohl, my esteemed colleague Lewis Pohl, who serves as the Dean of the College of Business, and his incredible staff who helped make all these arrangements to set this up. Finally, I want to thank Randy Atkins, Paul Landau from UNO's Political Science Department for taking the campus lead in planning this event. Mayor de Blasio, I want to give you a warm welcome for being here. We're very happy you're here, and we think you will enjoy your visit. As short as it is, we know you'll want to come back after you've seen what a great city Omaha is. Among many other things, Omaha is the home to Warren Buffett, 5 Fortune 500 companies, the College World Series, Boys Town, and the world's greatest zoo. Following Mayor de Blasio's talk, there will be time for some questions and answers. I will be hosting the question and answer period. There are note cards on your table to write down any question you might have, and there will be folks circulating around the room picking up the cards and giving them to me so that I can ask Mayor de Blasio whatever questions come up. It is my pleasure now to introduce Jim Crounse. Before I share with you a little about Jim's distinguished career, I want to thank him for his generosity in establishing the Peter Hoagland Lecture Series at the University of Nebraska. Because of Jim, the university is able to bring nationally known speakers to campus to articulate the values that Congressman Hoagland personified. Jim Crounse is recognized as one of the top Democratic direct mail consultants in the country. In 2008 and again in 2012, Jim captained the team that did direct mail for President Barack Obama. After the 2008 election, the Obama transition team asked Jim to head the confirmation team of Treasury Secretary Timothy Geithner and U.S. Trade Representative Ron Kirk. Jim has also perused direct mail for President Bill Clinton and scores of high-profile races, including U.S. Senators Evan Bayh, Joe Donnelly, Max Baucus, Kent Conrad, Byron Dorgan, and Jack Reed, to name a few. And he was an advisor to Omaha Congressman Brad Ashford in his successful challenge race last November. Most notably, Jim was Chief of Staff to Congressman Peter Hoagland during his first 2 terms in office. Jim holds an undergraduate degree from the University of Nebraska and a law degree from Creighton. He is married, and his wife Patsy is with us here tonight, as we know. Please join me in welcoming and thanking Jim Crounse.
Thank you, Dave, and thank you for hosting the lecture. Really appreciate it. The mayor of New York is in Omaha tonight. How about that? Pretty amazing. I want to make a few remarks. I'm going to talk a little bit about my friend Peter Hoagland, and then I'm going to introduce Bill. Before I do that, I want to call on State Senator Jeremy Nordquist to give you a very special Nebraska welcome and honor.
Well, Mayor, I don't know if you're aware, but Nebraska has a great Navy that we've had for many years, and we like to honor people of profiles like yours by making them an admiral in our Navy. So on behalf of my legislative colleagues that are here and with the governor's signature, I'd like to make you an admiral in the great Navy of Nebraska.
So Jeremy says that instead of mayor, I should call him now Admiral de Blasio. I want to thank, where's Brian? President of the foundation is right there. He's only right in front of me. Thank you. The foundation, this lecture wouldn't have happened without the foundation. I think Brian identified all the people who worked so hard to make this happen and help us raise money for the lecture. And you do a great job, and thank you so much. I want to thank the Political Science Department here at UNO, Randy Atkins and Paul Landau, for also hosting tonight. And because I'm a political operative, I want to introduce two people who traveled in with the mayor. Michael Casey works for the mayor and does scheduling and special events, and my friend John Del Cicato. Okay, so John makes TV ads for Democratic candidates, did some of the very best ads for President Obama. And how many people saw the ad where Bill de Blasio appears with his son Dante, which was perhaps the best political ad ever made, and John created that ad, and is a good friend, and I'm really glad to welcome him. I don't have an admiralship for you, but we're glad you're here. For those of you who didn't have the honor and pleasure of knowing Peter Hoagland, let me tell you a little bit about him. Peter served in the state legislature for 8 years and Congress for 6 years. For me, he had really 2 unique qualities, and this lecture series is dedicated towards those 2 unique qualities. First was Peter's integrity, which was impeccable. And we honor that with this lecture and honor his service that way. Second, Peter's love of learning issues, facts, details, and the process of turning good ideas into good laws was remarkable and something I'll never forget, and it's pretty rare these days. I know in this day and age people are very cynical, but Peter really felt like he wanted to inspire young people to follow his example. And I hope the lecture tonight inspires young people who will follow in his footsteps and follow in Admiral de Blasio's footsteps and serve the public. When I first had the idea of starting the lecture 6 years ago, I was literally at a Bill de Blasio for City Council meeting at the Park Slope, Brooklyn YMCA, which is one of the unofficial de Blasio headquarters. Bill was there that day, and that was the day I locked down Ted Sorensen to be our first speaker. Bill has always asked me about the lecture and has always been interested in it. In fact, the week before his election as mayor, I was in New York City, and we were kind of barnstorming around the town, and I was witnessing this extraordinary outpouring of support that was mushrooming for Bill. And he said, "Who is your speaker this year? Or next year?" And I said, "You, if you win." And so he won, and he's honoring that. I first met Bill in 2000. Bill was running Hillary Clinton's Senate race, and my firm did the direct mail. And then the next year in 2001, Bill decided to run for the city council, and I worked for him in that race. And Bill was a great candidate. The campaign was very impressive. It was a very competitive race. At one point, knocking on doors, Bill broke his ankle, but it didn't stop him. And I came up the day before Election Day to help him. And we were up really late, 2 or 3 in the morning. We were putting together literature packages and putting out signs and anybody in politics, all the crazy things you do the night before an election. I woke up in the morning, I had a late breakfast. The date of that election day was 9/11. While I was eating breakfast over the hotel loudspeaker, there was an announcement that there was a big emergency in Manhattan and everybody should evacuate. I was staying at the Marriott in Brooklyn, just over the Brooklyn Bridge, if you know it. And a herd of people kind of got pushed out of the hotel, walked down to a park in Brooklyn where you could literally see the Twin Towers, and they were both, on fire and smoking. And anybody who was in New York that day, it was just a gorgeous day, 80 degrees and not a cloud in the sky, brilliant blue. Half the sky was now black with smoke. And I just stood there, and there was a guy in back of me, a construction worker who had a radio on, and I said, "What do you know what happened?" And then some planes crashed. Nobody knew anything. It was very chaotic. I went back to the headquarters after I was looking for Paul Landau's son, who was helping us, and just worried like hell to make sure he was okay. And Bill had hooked up with me at the headquarters. A lot of us went there. And by 10 o'clock in the morning, they canceled the election. And Bill and I took off, not knowing where to go, what to do. Bill wanted to make sure his wife and kids were okay. So we went back to his house. And we took a walk, and we didn't, as you know, the early news reports were, nobody really knew what was going on, and we knew the one tower had collapsed. But I spent the day with Bill and his family, and here's what I remember learning about Bill de Blasio that day. That he cared deeply about his community and mourned for the people hurt, that he cared deeply for his family, that he wanted to serve the city of New York and bring his extraordinary skills to the table, that he put people and their needs first, and that he had core principles and values that were steadfast. Bill went on to win the election that they held 3 weeks later and served a couple of terms on the city council. Then Bill ran for public advocate. I think we started out 30 or 40 points behind. But like always, Bill put together a team of people. Bill is a gatherer of people. And we went at it, and Bill won. And it was a great victory. And then 2 years ago, Bill ran for mayor. Again, a long shot candidate. If I remember correctly, we started out in 4th in the polling. So we started out in 4th, way back, single digits. No one really gave him a chance. But like always, Bill gathered a team of dedicated people. I was so proud to be part of that team. And with his leadership, we plotted a course, we stuck to it, we made smart decisions, and Bill won. So around the country, I meet lots of people, they say, how did this happen? We don't really understand. How did it happen? Well, it happened because Bill de Blasio told the story of his family experience, and it's one that rang true for all New Yorkers. It happened because he articulated a clear vision for the city of New York, a vision that was inclusive of all people sharing in economic prosperity, of all people getting educational opportunities, and in all people sharing the American dream. As mayor, he's put that vision into practice and he's gotten things done. And I'm so proud that he's here tonight. Please welcome my friend, Bill de Blasio.
Thank you so much. It is such an honor to be here at UNO. I want to thank everyone who took the time tonight to join us and be a part of this lecture series honoring a great man. And I want to especially thank my colleagues in elective office for all you do for this community. Thank you for your service. I want to thank folks who are here in this room. I understand that some of the students are in other rooms. I want to thank them for their diligence, and I look forward to visiting the other rooms afterwards and saying hello to them as well, and appreciate them being a part of this evening. Now, it is fitting that people would turn out to hear from an admiral about important issues affecting national security. I didn't know I would have the title earlier this evening, but I'm very honored to have it now. I must be the only person who didn't know Nebraska had a Navy, and I feel embarrassed. I feel like I misunderstood this state, and I'm sorry about that. But now I'm in the know. But let me attest that I have had a big Nebraskan imprint on my life and career. You heard from Jim Crounse how closely we have worked together over the last 15 years. And Jim is my longest serving consultant in the work I have done. And the reason that's pertinent, he was born and bred in Omaha, went to Central High School, if I remember correctly, and the university. So Jim Crounse is the real thing, and I like to believe in all that wonderful direct mail we did on my campaigns. It was directed to people of New York City, but there was an underlying set of Omaha values in that mail that obviously worked, because people felt it, and Jim did an extraordinary job. And we have been together in some very tough times and very painful times, as Jim described, and also some times of great celebration. But he is someone that the people of this city and the people of this state should be very proud of for what he's done for this country. Let's thank Jim Crounse. I can say with no fear of contradiction, Jim Crounse is an even better person since Patsy came into his life. So Patsy, thank you for improving Jim Crounse in so many ways, and for all the wonderful things about you. I want to thank everyone who's part of the UNO community. I want to thank Brian Hastings for the work he does with the foundation. I want to thank Dean Booker. I also want to thank a man who really represents a lot of the values that I hold in terms of uplifting working people, Terry Moore, the president of the Omaha Federation of Labor. Thank you for fighting for working people. And the greatest honor is to speak at an event named after Congressman Peter Hoagland, because everything I've ever known about Peter Hoagland is about integrity and about a devotion to public service that we would like to see more of. I'll put it in the positive. We'd like to see more of a clarity of purpose, a purity of purpose. And there's a reason people are gathered here in his name again this year, because he did something that showed a lot of people the way things are supposed to be done. He was a tireless advocate for his district and for the people of Nebraska. He's a man of principle, and he was also someone who saw over the horizon. Because you'll remember, it was not long ago that if you said things like climate change and global warming, many people would tell you the science was inconclusive, or many people would tell you there were more important issues to worry about, and why were you being so alarmist? Well, Peter Hoagland understood long before most people in the mainstream these were issues we had to grapple with. And he's one of the people who helped us to get to that recognition. He did a lot to give people faith in government. He did a lot for transparency in government and in political campaigns. He fathered the open meetings law here in Nebraska and furthered the work of reform. He left us way too soon. He was a man who was ahead of his time, and we wish he was still here giving us that guidance. But I want to thank him, and I want to most especially thank his family for keeping his memory alive. And for me, it's a real honor, even with him no longer with us, it's an honor to be associated with his name. And let's thank the Hoagland family for all they do. Now, part one of my Nebraskan influences is Jim Crounse. I told you about that, but I have probably a much deeper part two to tell you about. And this is in the believe it or not category, but it's true. Believe it or not, this New Yorker standing in front of you has roots here in Nebraska. My paternal grandmother, Nina Warren, she was actually born in Iowa, but her father, Solomon Warren, wanted his children to get a good education. They lived in a small farm town in Iowa, Blanchard, Iowa, and he wanted his children to have something better. And so he wanted to go to a big city where there was great institutions and culture and education. So he moved his family to Lincoln, Nebraska. And in 1896, when my grandmother, Nina, was 8 years old, she moved to Nebraska. Her father, Solomon, got a job as a traveling salesman for a big coffee company in Chicago. They made a new life. My grandmother and her five siblings benefited from all that Nebraska had to offer. They went to the university. They also, before that, got a great education in the local schools. And at that time, university tuition was free for state residents, apart from a $5 matriculation fee and lab fees for science courses. So I just want to confirm that's still the understanding, right? Free plus $5 in lab fees. Those lab fees will kill you, let me tell you. Now, my grandmother wrote her life story. A lot of the family members encouraged her to write her story. And so she wrote it up at the end of her life. And there's a line that I think people in this room will appreciate. She wrote that, quote, "Everything good in my life grew from the decision that her father made to relocate the family to Nebraska." So I am sure right now she is smiling down on us at UNO and appreciating that the Nebraska roots in our family are alive and well tonight. This state has a lot to teach us over the years, and it's important to take a full stock of the history. A lot of people know that I talk about being a progressive. I'm very proud to use that phrase. I use that phrase very consciously, and it refers to a very rich tradition in this country going back well over 100 years. And in that strong tradition, I find a powerful political home. Well, one of the great core heartlands of the progressive movement was here in Nebraska. As far back as the late 1800s, the Nebraska Populist Party fought for some of the things that at the time were controversial. but became underpinnings of a good and decent society. The Nebraska Populist Party fought to define the 8-hour day as the legal workday, controversial at the time and something that we came to depend on. The party championed a graduated income tax system so the wealthy would pay their fair share. Again, a radical idea at the time, one that we understand the power of today. Nebraska produced some of the great progressives, including the great U.S. Senator George Norris. Senator Norris was hailed by one of my heroes, President Franklin Roosevelt, as, quote, the very perfect, gentle knight of American progressive ideals. And I would say, when Franklin Roosevelt says you're a gentle knight of progressive ideals, he knows what he's talking about. So that's a credit to Nebraska as well. Norris was an ardent supporter of direct government. He believed in a democracy that really worked for people, and his leadership is one of the reasons that Nebraska has the modern-day distinction of the unicameral legislature, of which I know you are justly proud. Norris fought very openly, very proudly for working people, and he looked for allies who felt the same way. One happened to be a feisty New Yorker who I know, with no fear of contradiction, later would become the greatest mayor this city has ever known, my city of New York has ever known, and the greatest mayor I think we ever will know, Fiorello LaGuardia. And Norris and LaGuardia teamed up, and they wrote and passed the Norris-LaGuardia Act, which protected the right of working people to organize, protected that fundamental right of working people to defend their interests, and it cracked down on abusive labor practices. It was one of the foundational elements of the New Deal era. It said it was not just about government stepping in and ensuring decency and fairness for people, ensuring economic stability for families. It was also about protecting labor that had been under such assault before then, protecting the labor movement, knowing that the labor movement was one of the building blocks of the middle class. Because of that legislation, we saw a labor movement flourish, we saw a middle class flourish, and all that is under threat today. It's extraordinary to think that such a proud history, such an effective tradition could somehow have come unglued. But it has. Those gains that began, in some cases back in the late 1800s, crystallized in the 1930s, those gains are a great risk today. And it's up to all of us in this time to turn the course of this country. The crisis that we face today is profound. It's the crisis of our times, income inequality. Something happening in this country that defies our values as Americans and undermines our security and our stability and our future. Growing income inequality that undermines the very notion of the American dream and the sense of this being a country for all. This is not a theoretical problem. This is not something that just happens in a free enterprise system and something we accept as a necessary byproduct of a capitalist economy. This is a crisis such as we haven't seen before. This is a crisis that's happening in this time. Because of the Great Recession and so many other changes that have occurred, it's a different kind of crisis. The income inequality crisis is greater than we've seen it before, and it's particular, and we have to understand it for what it is. If we understand it, we have a chance of addressing it. So let's go back to the origins of this moment we live in now. In the fall of 2008, financial collapse, sending our country into the greatest economic turmoil since the Great Depression. We thought, any of us who grew up with parents and family members from the Depression era, we thought that's something that could never happen again. And to be fair, the Great Recession wasn't as bad, thank God. But it was profound, and it's had lasting impact. And we're seeing a change that we could not have anticipated. So a new dynamic has emerged. And what happened was a lot of people profoundly were thrown back on their heels. A lot of people were unable to recover. Some recovered very, very slowly. But we saw quickly something we hadn't seen as much before. The very wealthy bounced back quickly, but they didn't just bounce back to where they were before. Their wealth climbed to extraordinary new heights. And nowhere was this reality clearer than in New York City. Wall Street came roaring back. You watched the news, record set, another record set, another record set. The market was stronger and stronger. The net worth of millionaires and billionaires skyrocketed. In Manhattan, a single apartment sold for a jaw-dropping $100 million. Another apartment rented for $500,000 a month. Now I can just imagine, I want you to picture this, I can imagine the guy who bought the first apartment running into the guy who rented the second apartment. The first guy says, "So you're renting, huh? Well, don't worry, pal, things are gonna get better for you." So some people are doing that good. Was this shared prosperity? Nowhere near it. At the very same time, 46% of the people of my city were living at or near the poverty level. At or near the poverty level. You have families in New York City making $30,000 or $35,000 a year for a family of four, barely able with the cost of living in our city to get by. You have many, many families in our city making well under $20,000 a year in one of the most expensive cities in the country. 46% of our people struggling. So I said in my 2013 campaign, I laid it out very squarely. I said we're living a tale of two cities. We have to explain what it is and be honest about it and frank about it if we're going to do something about it. And I explained that the middle class as we knew it was under profound threat. Middle class was not just getting squeezed, it wasn't just under a little bit of pressure, it was getting undermined. The middle class, as we knew it, was starting to disappear. Now, one of the things I said very clearly in my campaign is we got to think about who we are as a people, what we believe in, what we aspire to. And I knew New Yorkers did not want to live in a gilded city. If everyday people couldn't live in New York City, if it became little more than just a playground for the rich, it just wouldn't be the same place. So much of what has been good about New York City, so much of what has been good about Omaha, so much of what's been good about this country has been opportunity and inclusion and openness and a place for everyone, regardless of your origins. If that idea gets undermined, we're not the same place, and that's so deeply true in New York City, this place that has welcomed everyone and thrived as a result. So I said very clearly, if we want to continue that great tradition, if we want to be the inheritors of generations upon generations of successful, striving, creative, energetic people, if we want to live in that great sense of communion where everyone lives together, we have to protect our city, we have to maintain it as a place for all. So I campaigned with a clear message that we had to do something about it. I said this is going to take a host of things to fight inequality. I know all of them can't be done at the local level, but I said very simply, whatever we could do at the local level, we needed to. I said we can't expect our children to get ahead if they're not educated. They can't be educated if they don't have early childhood education. So I said something simple. We need full-day pre-K for every child in our city. And it was as simple as that. If we wanted to change our city, we needed after-school programs so kids would be safe after school and they continue their learning day. If they're going to actually be a part of this modern economy that demands more educationally than any time previously in history, we had to give them more. And that would be one of the ways that we would achieve a pathway to maintaining an open and equal society. And I had the audacity to suggest that we could pay for this with a modest tax on those who made $500,000 or more. And I knew that those who make $500,000 or more could afford it, and I knew it would change the lives of thousands and thousands of children, and I knew it would make for a stronger city for all. That's what I set out to do. Well, That was one of the core notions of my campaign, and the pundits looked at this proposal, they looked at this vision and this explanation, of course, immediately said that what I was saying would never work. I was, as you heard, I spent a lot of time in fourth place. The pundits were quite clear that this was not going to be a winning formula. And there was a conventional wisdom that said if you ask the wealthy to pay their fair share, you'll make a lot of enemies in high places, and you'll simply be unable to win an election. I knew, because I'd talked to so many of my fellow New Yorkers, I knew they thought differently. I knew they saw what was happening, and they knew something had to change. They knew that the plan I was putting forward was actually about securing a future for all. It was not meant to punish anyone. It wasn't meant to punish success. It was meant to create more success stories. And people responded. They responded all over the city. Well, I will fast forward and say, we were able to win that election. Thank you, Jim Crounse. And once you win the election, you say you want to change things, a new round of pundits and naysayers comes along and says, okay, well, all those ideas can't actually happen now. That's great, you won the election, that's nice, but you can't actually put these ideas into action. So we fought to make our pre-K plan a reality. I fought for the tax increase on those who made more than $500,000. Our state government didn't see eye to eye with me, but they did give us the money. They didn't give us the tax, but they did give us the money. And so we expanded pre-K greatly, and starting in the school year coming up in this September, every single child of pre-K age in New York City will get full-day pre-K. And that's going to make a huge difference. Every child in middle school who needs an after-school program will get it automatically for free. We said we have to work on every front if we're going to address income inequality, so we made sure that 500,000 more people had paid sick leaves so that if they were sick, they did not lose a day's pay or 2 days' pay or a week's pay, because so many of our people couldn't keep their household budget together. They lost even a day or two's pay. We extended our living wage to thousands more people. We're working as we speak in our state capital to increase the minimum wage. We're trying to use all the tools we have, and we're not just trying to raise wages and improve benefits, we're also going at the #1 expense in the lives of New Yorkers, and I think of most people, which is housing. So we have the most ambitious, affordable housing plan that any locality in the entire country has attempted. 200,000 units of housing built or preserved over the next 10 years, which is enough for almost 500,000 people. If you can actually help people afford their housing, even if they're struggling to get better wages and benefits, if they can afford their housing, you turn their lives around and you make a host of possibilities available to them and their families. So we knew we could do this partly because we were willing to change the rules. If we were going to build that much housing, it meant we were going to have a very different approach to development in our city. So we said to developers, we're going to give you every opportunity to build, but there's going to be a condition. The condition is you have to create affordable housing. You can build market housing, but you have to create affordable housing as part of the package so people actually can afford to live in our city. Well, all that's moving. And again, we know we can't do it all from one city, to say the least, but we're doing everything we know how to do. And we're trying to work with leaders all over the country, mayors and other leaders, to start to change the dialogue in this country, to start to change the debate in Washington, to start to think about the things that we could actually do together to address income inequality. Now, you might be thinking, well, New York City is a long way from Omaha. And I have to say, the city that I have the great honor of leading is distinct in many ways. It is particular in many ways. But the income inequality crisis is not unique to my city. It's happening all over this country. It is not just a problem in one region or another. The fact that our middle class is being undermined is happening in every one of our 50 states. And people are working hard. They are working harder than ever just to keep their heads above water. That's what's happened to the American dream for so many people. They work harder and harder and actually find themselves falling behind. That takes a national commitment. To address a problem of that magnitude takes a national commitment. It takes a change in how we think about things and a change in our willingness to act. And let's face it, because we can see it before our very eyes across our country, wealth is being concentrated more and more and more in the hands of a very few. This has been now deepening over the last few decades. Prosperity and opportunity for so many Americans is becoming more and more elusive. A select few seem to benefit more and more, and those who play hard, or excuse me, those who work hard and play by the rules, who would think that that would be what it would take to get ahead, find that that formula isn't working the way it used to. A typical American family, in real terms, has actually gone backwards over the last quarter century. Adjusted for inflation, the median American family actually is making less today than they were 25 years ago. We had the recession. As I said, a lot of people still deeply feeling the effects. Some people came back and then went far, far beyond their previous wealth. In fact, since the recession officially ended, 91% of the new economic gains have gone to just the top 1% of our population. It's a profound imbalance, and it reminds us of the Roaring '20s and before, because you have to go all the way back to the 1920s to find income disparity on this level. But the challenge now is it is actually getting worse as we speak. So I look at this and I say, wait a minute. The American dream is one of the most powerful ideas in the history of this world. It's an idea that animated so much good. So many people participated, so many people benefited. And it went on for decade after decade, generation after generation. And if that is being undermined, if that's no longer available to people, we won't be the same country. One of the most powerful parts of the American dream was the notion that the next generation would almost inevitably do better than the one before. I talked to so many parents, folks who even a decade ago liked to call themselves securely middle class or now insecurely middle class, and they're honest about their deep concern for their children. Will their children have opportunity like they had? Will they be able to get a good education? Will they be able to afford a good education? Even if they can, how much debt will they carry with them? Folks are clearer and clearer that they may not get to the middle class, or if they get there, they're going to have to cling to it. And that's not what so many of us grew up with. And there's nothing that says the way we grew up was fated to be. It had to be created. I mentioned people like Roosevelt and Norris and LaGuardia. There were so many leaders who decided that they had to do something to create that inclusive society, that society of opportunity. And then other leaders in the last few decades took us in a different direction, most notably Ronald Reagan. And things changed. In our time, we have to decide. If our reality is an American dream that is slowly ceasing to function, what are we called to do? What are the tools available to us? If part of what made this country great was that people worked hard and got rewarded for their work, how do we restore that? How to create a country where you're not just rewarded for wealth, but you're rewarded for work, honest, hard work? Well, a lot of people who've done very well have looked at this situation with the same concern. I would say the strongest voice among them comes from Omaha, Nebraska. Warren Buffett has been speaking for years about the inequality crisis and the dangers it poses. In 2011, he famously calculated his own federal tax rate at 17.4%. noted it was about half the rate that his office staff had and even less than his own secretary. That took decency and honesty to say that out loud to the world. He was one of the first to note how badly things were going and how they had to be addressed. Now, I think we can agree that Warren Buffett is not exactly a left-wing socialist. Maybe Fox News would say he is, but I think most people wouldn't. But he recognized the problem was not just a matter of fairness and our values, it was a matter of basic economics. We've heard other powerful voices. Robert Reich has been such an important voice, our former labor secretary. And he said very clearly, the problem here is if you have an economy where some people have a lot of money and aren't going to spend it, and then you have a lot of people who don't have money and can't spend it, you're out of balance. About 70% of our economy derives from spending of everyday Americans. Reich said, quote, if consumers don't have adequate purchasing power, businesses have no incentive to expand or hire additional workers. Because the rich spend a smaller proportion of the incomes in the middle class and the poor, it stands to reason that as a larger and larger share of our nation's total income goes to the top, consumer demand is actually dampened. The rich get richer, the economy gets poorer. Think about that. So, I believe it's time to say out loud just how bad this problem is and to be resolved that together we can do something about it. Now, I have to say, lest anyone think this is a partisan view, I have a critique of both parties on this score. I don't think either of our two major parties has spoken to this issue. I was very clear in saying that many of my fellow Democrats in 2014 went to great pains to not address the income inequality issue and not offer bold solutions. They didn't talk about the struggle of the middle class in terms of the things that we actually have to do to reverse it, and Lord knows, fewer and fewer of our leaders are willing to say the word poverty and acknowledge how many of our fellow Americans still live in poverty and what an unacceptable condition that is. We have a chance to redefine things now. And if we see where this is coming from, and we talk to each other about the origins of the problem and the way forward, the people can lead their leaders out of this crisis. But we ought to recognize how many people stand to benefit from the status quo. One of the great thinkers on this topic in this country, the Nobel Prize winning economist Joseph Stiglitz, he said something very simple about why we are where we are. He said, quote, the American political system is overrun by money. Economic inequality translates into political inequality, and political inequality yields increasing economic inequality. That's the country we're living in today. When everyday Americans feel the game is rigged against them, they have a lot of evidence. And they're yearning to hear us all stand up and acknowledge it and do something. I think there is a way forward. I think it's based on three very, very simple principles. I think they're ideas that both parties and independents as well could embrace, but they make a huge difference in our country. Simple principles. First, make work pay again. Hardworking people should be able to make ends meet. We need to build an economy that works for everyday New Yorkers, folks who have second jobs, not just folks who have second homes. Second, help working parents. That's why we focused on pre-K. That's why we focused on after school. That's why we focused on paid sick leave. If a parent has a child who's sick and needs to stay home from work, what a painful decision. Are you going to go to work and make that day's pay you desperately need, or are you going to take care of your sick child? Why is that choice forced upon people in America today? We can create strong families by providing some basic smart support for working families. And finally, let's honor work and not just wealth. Because the reality is the way we govern honors wealth. The way we govern defers to wealth. If you think about the things we have to do to get out of this jam, it will take resources. There's no government anywhere that has endless resources, so you have to make decisions about where you get the resources and what you do with them. So whenever the wealthy are not paying their fair share of taxes, there are consequences. It means we're shortchanging something else. And the something else is almost always the kinds of efforts that help the middle class or working people or the poor. It's pretty straightforward. We have an opportunity here to change the trajectory of this. Those principles would make all the difference in the world if we applied them consistently. And then where would they take us in terms of the kind of actual policies that we would adopt that would change people's lives in the here and now? I'm going to tell you them very quickly. 8 fast examples. Ways we can address the income inequality crisis, ways we can lift the floor for working people, help working parents, make work matter, honor work as much as wealth. 1, and this is about the most obvious of them all, raise the minimum wage to keep up with the cost of living. It couldn't be more basic. New York City right now, we're fighting for a $13 minimum wage with automatic indexing to inflation that would take us to about $15 by 2019. As many of you know, today has been called Fight for 15 Day. National Day of Action all across this country, progressives and labor working together to increase the minimum wage from coast to coast, and you're seeing this movement grow all over the country. People want that basic fairness. Now, here again, Nebraska gets tremendous credit. Because even though if you watch the pundits, the simple moniker given to Nebraska is red state, as if that's the end of the discussion. But lo and behold, last year, you defied the conventional wisdom. You had a referendum on the ballot for minimum wage, and you passed that minimum wage increase. So I say thank you, Nebraska. Bottom line is that one is an example of why you've heard the famous phrases President Obama said so powerfully back in 2004, there's no red states or blue states, and he talked about American values. Well, I'd say there's no red wages or blue wages. People need decent wages. They need decent benefits for their families. That should be something that unites us. Second point, let's pressure. Let's put forward the notion to our business community that it's not just a matter of legislation or government regulation. Businesses can step forward and raise the wages of their workers, can improve the benefits of their workers directly, proactively. We see more and more businesses doing that, by the way. I'd like to see many more than we've seen. I'd like to see them go farther, but we see, slowly but surely, a certain number of businesses gotten the point and are doing something on their own, and we all have the ability to influence those businesses to go farther. Third, federal government. Huge impact on our economy. All the contracts they give, they should give special consideration to those contracts to businesses that honor organized labor and the right to organize. And here's why. You can trace this income inequality crisis very clearly from the end of the 1960s, beginning of the 1970s, when things were still working for middle-class people. Then it starts to trail off, and one of the big, clear parallel occurrences is the decline of the labor movement. Almost tracking exactly. The decline in middle-class earnings tracks with the decline of the labor movement. Fourth, what I mentioned earlier about pre-K, early child education is the difference maker in education. Reaching kids early when they're most able to learn, changing their trajectory from the beginning, investing in them when the investment makes the biggest impact, lifting all boats and helping families right then and there, but also creating a smarter generation, a more prepared generation of kids for 15 and 20 years from now who could be a generation that lives in greater fairness and equality. Okay, now number five. Number five begs the question, how do you pay for number four, pre-K for all the kids in this country? Well, I turn once again to Omaha, to Mr. Buffett. The Buffett rule. If the Buffett rule were the law of the land, if millionaires were not paying a lower tax rate than their secretaries, we would generate enough money for pre-K for every child in the United States of America. I'm really got a lot of good things to say about Nebraska today, as you can see. 6, let's take the model of paid sick leave that we've done in New York and has been achieved in cities and states around the country. Let's make that national so that people have that security regardless of illness. 7, and this is one, again, I think should unite all of us across every regional and partisan line. Let's end tax breaks for companies that ship jobs overseas. Think about that for a moment. Are dollars funding companies to send their jobs elsewhere? That should be a no-brainer. Let's take that money and invest it in roads and bridges, and mass transit, highways, the things that actually make this country work and create jobs. And 8, let's close the carried interest loophole. This is one of those matters of fairness. Folks on Wall Street, money managers, have their income taxed less than the earned income of the rest of us. Let's close that loophole. Let's tax them the same way everyone else is taxed and use that money to help so many working people who have a job but can't make ends meet. Let's help them through the earned income tax credit. We can give more people that opportunity with just that basic tax fairness. Everything I just laid out, all those 8 steps, they are attainable, they're doable in the here and now. They're politically easy? No. Will it take a lot of work? Yes. But it requires changing the minds of the people in Washington, first and foremost, but also Americans talking to Americans about the kind of country we want to have and what we're willing to do to get there, just like we did back in the time of Roosevelt and Norris and LaGuardia. Some will hear that simple list and call it class warfare. They'll say it's impossible, they'll say it's unrealistic, they'll say it's mean-spirited. It's none of those things. And the same exact charges were thrown at Senator Norris and President Roosevelt and Mayor LaGuardia on a regular basis. No, this is about fairness. This is about inclusion, rebuilding the middle class. It can be done. It can be done if we're conscious of the steps it takes and we're willing to be bold. And some people will try and distract you. And they'll say, wait a minute, growth will solve this problem. Let's just have more growth. But some very smart people have looked at this question, including our friends at the Roosevelt Institute that carry on the great work of President Roosevelt to this day. And they point out so clearly, growth alone, growth without fairness, growth without inclusion doesn't solve the problem. Just like the fact that some people are making more and more and more money doesn't mean that it reaches everyone else. Folks at the Roosevelt Institute have made a very, very clear point. You should not say it's a choice between more growth, even at the cost of more inequality. The path forward is growth that actually makes for a more equal country. And that's a choice. Because growth that just deepens the pattern we're in now isn't going to help us. Growth that just keeps wages stagnant, makes some companies and some individuals rich but impoverishes the rest of us, isn't going to help us. We need a set of rules that actually gets us to the outcome we want. And it's within our power. We want a country where working people can thrive, where the next generation can do as well or better. We want to put a premium on sweat equity, not just private equity. We want to make sure that people who make things, people who serve other people who generate ideas to actually make people's everyday lives better, that those folks can do just as well as folks who are clever enough to take a lot of wealth and turn it into a lot more wealth. Tackling income inequality is going to be a huge, huge challenge. But we've actually seen a similar challenge addressed before. We've seen this country band together in the face of tremendous economic strain. We've seen people unify. We've seen this country stare down crises that were thought to be insurmountable. There's a lot of grit and determination that is part of what makes us Americans. You feel a very clear version of that in the streets of my city. I know you feel it here in Omaha. I think you feel it all over the country. There's enough in us to overcome what challenges us. And I believe we can do that together. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mayor de Blasio, what do you think about the gender gap when it comes to salary? And do you think, in spite of current efforts, that the gap will ever close?
I do think it'll close. I think it'll take a lot of work, but I am optimistic. There's one thing that we should be very proud of as Americans is that we are progressing in terms of a lot of examples of mutual understanding and inclusion, not where we need to be economically, but certainly socially. And I think that's crucial because I think people are demanding pay equity. I also think the exact same solutions I'm talking about in terms of income inequality go directly at the pay equity question. Because the folks who are getting the short end of the stick so often are working women in low-wage jobs. So I am optimistic because I like the trajectory of the country, but I think the same solutions apply.
What are your views on reducing gun violence in the inner city? And what has New York City done to reduce gun violence, and how can other cities emulate that?
I think, to say the least, at the national level, at the state level, we need a very different approach to regulating handguns in particular, assault rifles, et cetera. That is a big and complicated debate. Everyone knows probably where they stand on that. But when you come down to the local level, knowing that we are deeply affected by everything around us, including states that have very lenient rules on gun sales, one of the things we can do well is deepen the relationship between police and community. We've seen this issue play out all around the country. We're at the front line of it in New York City. We are trying strenuously to reduce some of the tensions that existed between police and members of many of our neighborhoods, draw them closer, and that means creating a flow of information and partnership that actually gets us to where the bad guys are and where the illegal weapons are. And that's one of the most frontline things we can do to address gun violence.
How do you rate New York City's environmental record, as well as the strength of its current citywide sustainability efforts?
Well,
Is there something that Omaha can do to be more mindful of its green culture?
I don't obviously know enough about Omaha's efforts. I'll speak broadly about what we've done, and I certainly would encourage all cities to work together in this vein. Look, my predecessor, to his credit, Michael Bloomberg, was very focused on climate change and was a international leader and took some of the right steps to get New York City going in the right direction. We've amplified that. And so in September, I had the great honor of welcoming delegates from around the world at the United Nations for the Climate Summit. And then that day, New York City committed to reduce its emissions by 80% by the year 2050. And that starts with retrofitting. Thank you. That's a pro-climate change fighter right there, or anti-climate change fighter. We said we're going to retrofit every one of our public buildings. We said to our private sector, join with us. Let's find a way to retrofit all of our substantial private buildings. And we believe we can do that together, and for any reason there's hesitation, we'll create standards. But I think the good news when it comes to climate change is there's a really intensifying understanding by everyday people about what it means. We felt it the hard way during Hurricane Sandy. We found out what climate change meant in very vivid new ways. So I think there's much more resolve among the people to address climate change than ever before. In fact, the people are ahead of the leaders on this. I would urge cities to take on the 80 by 50 goal. I think it helps to generate a whole lot of other action.
What is the greatest?
I felt like the referees were reviewing my answer. They're like, 5-yard penalty, holding.
What is the greatest obstacle to the U.S. being recognized worldwide as a #1 educator again?
Well, I think, from my point of view, it's early childhood education. I think there's a lot of things we need to do differently when it comes to education. And I would enumerate them quickly. I think we need to focus on teacher training and teacher retention. Most of the debate is about the people who should not be teaching. The debate should be about how we get the best people into teaching and keep them there. I think we need to focus on extending the school day in all sorts of ways, and the way we do it in many cases through after school. I think we have to figure out how to get parents much more deeply involved in their children's education. One of the things we just started a few days ago in New York City is thinking of, from the very beginning of a child's life, parents talking to their baby and building vocabulary. I think there's so many foundational things we need to do. But the thing I believe is the biggest difference maker is early childhood education. Once upon a time in this country, there wasn't even public education. Then we agreed there should be public education. We built out that notion over years. And now in parts of New York State, there's only half-day kindergarten. We believe that the reality of today, with the educational demands necessary in our society, requires that we need to go to not just pre-K, but full-day pre-K, and that should become a national standard.
One more question, this may be the most important one. Yankees or Mets?
Well, is this actually the last question?
Yes.
Then I'm going to tell you a vignette. I will tell you a vignette. So one day, all my stories begin with the phrase, I was minding my own business. So one day I'm minding my own business. I'm a city council member, thanks to Jim Crounse, and I walk into City Hall, and there's a little bit of commotion by the city council offices. So I go over to see what's going on. There's a New York Times reporter with a group of city council members around her. And I walk up innocently, not knowing what they're talking about at all, and the reporter has one of those handheld tape recorders, and she literally turns like this to me, and she goes, Bill, Yankees or Mets? And so my whole life passed before my eyes, because in and of itself, that's a controversial question if you are a leader in New York City. But the issue hadn't really been brought up publicly to me before as an elected official. And I had to make one of those decisions. I could do one of those tacky things like, oh, they're both great, or I'm just a baseball fan, or one of those things. I could choose, which had its own problems and wouldn't have been honest, or I could tell the full truth. So I was born in New York City, but when I was 5 years old, my parents moved to Massachusetts. As the literature professors would say at this point, the plot thickens. So I, in fact, arrived in Massachusetts in 1966, and 1967 was the impossible dream. Boston Red Sox, one of the great teams of all time, so I became a diehard Boston Red Sox fan. So until that moment, I really hadn't quite had to go on record. So after my life passed before my eyes, I said, you know what, honesty is the best policy, to heck with it. And I said the Boston Red Sox. Needless to say, there was some coverage of that fact. And then the kicker to this story is, fast forward to 2013, I'm running for mayor. Of course, Jim and other concerned consultants were wondering if there was some way to, as the consultants like to say, to walk this back. So I said, no, a lifelong devotion to a baseball team, then baseball is my sport, and this can't be walked back. This is who I am. Take it or leave it. And so we're straight up about it. here's what's amazing, and for you political science professors and majors in the room, I proceeded to crisscross New York City for a year, running for mayor. New Yorkers, I don't know if you heard about this, they're not shy at all. And they're rather opinionated, and I met a vast number of people at subways, supermarkets, bus stops, and I'm guaranteeing you not even 10 people made a wisecrack about it. And the moral of the story is, if you just tell it like it is, people are like, oh, okay. Let's go on to the next issue. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Tim Crounse has a presentation.
Do you have an Air Force, too?
Well, no, we were. Jeremy, do you have the Air Force Colonel? That question was a perfect segue to the last presentation, which I'm going to make. And then for those of you in the overflow room, the mayor's going to come over and visit with you and make sure he spends some time with you. That's very important to him. So because we're a little more bipartisan here in Nebraska, here's what we're going to do. The first presentation is a football jersey,
Nice.
The University of Nebraska. We're very proud of our football
yes.
team.
Oh, wow.
There's the Blasio.
That. Impressed. I gotta, hold on, I've got to model it.
Yeah, you got to model it. That's the.
I feel like a Husker.
You look like a Husker. And to be perfectly bipartisan, since we're at UNO, we're all very proud. How long has the hockey team been in existence?
I've heard
5
about
years?
this. No way.
Okay,
That's
a
different.
brief time, and they just made the Frozen Four. They got bounced out in the first round, but they did great. That's
beautiful.
And we're very proud of them. So here is a UNO hockey jersey.
Jim Crounse is so good, he made both the same number. Okay? Thank you so much. This is beautiful.
So thank you, everybody, for being here. This is a very special evening, and thank you, Mayor de Blasio, for coming. And everybody in the overflow room, we're coming out to visit with you right now.
All right.